The night of April 21st, 2016, draped itself over Pike County, Ohio, like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The rural landscape, dotted with modest homes and sprawling fields, lay quiet under a sky pricked with stars. The air carried the faint chill of early spring, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze or the distant bark of a dog. In this forgotten corner of America, where neighbors knew each other's names and secrets, the Rhoden family settled in for what should have been an ordinary night. They had no way of knowing that by sunrise, their world would be shattered, 8 lives snuffed out in a meticulously planned slaughter that would leave investigators baffled and a small community frozen in fear. The Rhodens were a tight-knit clan, their lives intertwined across generations, living in a cluster of trailers and small houses along Union Hill Road and nearby stretches. Christopher Rhoden Sr., 40, was the patriarch of sorts, a hard-working man with a love for cars and a reputation for keeping to himself. His home, a modest trailer, was where he lived with his cousin Gary Rhoden, 38, a man who shared Chris's quiet demeanor and rural roots. A few miles away, Christopher's ex-wife Dana Rhoden, 37, lived with their daughter, Hannah Mae Rhoden, 19, a young mother with dreams bigger than the confines of Pike County. Nearby, Clarence Frankie Rhoden, 20, Christopher's son, shared a home with his fiancée Hannah Gilly, 20, and their 6-month-old son. Further down the road, Kenneth Rhoden, 44, Christopher's younger brother, lived alone in his own trailer, content in his solitude. The family was unremarkable in many ways, working class, rooted in the land, and bound by blood and loyalty. But beneath the surface of their ordinary lives, something had stirred a darkness that would soon erupt. As the clock ticked past midnight, the Rhodens' homes were dark. Their inhabitants. A clock ticked past midnight. The Rhodens' homes were dark, their occupants asleep or winding down. The trailers and houses, scattered across the rolling hills, were isolated, surrounded by woods and fields, with no streetlights to pierce the night. Most of the family had turned in early, exhausted from the day's work. Christopher and Gary were in their beds, the faint hum of a television still playing in the background. Frankie and Hannah were curled up with their baby between them, the soft coos of the infant filling the quiet. Dana and Hannah Mae, in their own home, had settled in after tending to Hannah's newborn daughter, just 4 days old. Kenneth, in his solitary trailer, was likely asleep, unaware that this would be his final night. The scene was peaceful, almost idyllic, a snapshot of rural life, where time seemed to move slower. But the night was not as still as it seemed. Somewhere in the darkness, figures moved with purpose. They were not impulsive intruders or reckless thieves. Their steps were measured, their actions deliberate. They knew the layout of the Rhodens' properties, the paths between the homes, the routines of the family. They carried firearms, handguns, likely fitted with suppressors to muffle the shots. They had planned for this, perhaps for weeks or months, their intent as cold and unyielding as the spring night. They approached the first trailer, Christopher Sr.'s, with a precision that suggested familiarity. The security cameras that might have caught their movements had been tampered with, their lenses turned or wires cut, ensuring no trace of their presence would remain. The killers were not amateurs, they were execution. Inside Christopher's trailer, the air was still, the only sound the soft creak of the floorboards under the intruder's weight. They moved through the darkened rooms, their flashlights casting narrow beams that danced across the walls. Christopher lay in his bed, his breathing steady, unaware of the danger closing in. A single shot rang out, muffled, precise, a bullet to the head. He never stirred. Beside him, Gary Rhoden met the same fate, a second shot ending his life before he could even open his eyes. The killers didn't linger. They didn't ransack the trailer or take anything of value. Their purpose was singular: death. They slipped back into the night, leaving behind a scene so clean it seemed almost surgical. The killer's path took them to the next home, where Frankie Rhoden and Hannah Gilly slept with their 6-month-old son between them. The trailer was small, its walls thin, but the night swallowed any sound. The intruders entered as silently as before, their movements practiced. Frankie, like his father, was shot in the head, his body slumping into the mattress. Hannah, lying beside him, suffered the same fate, a bullet that ended her life in an instant. The baby nestled between his parents, stirred but was unharmed, his cries unheard in the chaos of the killer's swift retreat. The blood pooling around him would be the only sign of the horror that had unfolded. A few miles away, Dana Rhoden's home was next. The killers navigated the familiar terrain with ease, their boots barely leaving prints in the soft earth. Inside, Dana lay in her bedroom, her life extinguished with a single shot. Hannah Mae, her daughter, was nearby, her young life cut short in the same brutal manner. Her newborn daughter, just 4 days old, lay crying beside her mother's body, untouched by the violence that had claimed her family. The killer's restraint in sparing the children was a chilling anomaly, a deliberate choice that only deepened the mystery of their motive. The final stop was Kenneth Rhoden's trailer, isolated and quiet. The door was unlocked, as if the killers knew it would be. Kenneth, alone in his bed, was killed with the same cold efficiency, a single gunshot to the head. The trailer was undisturbed, no signs of a struggle, no indication of anything taken. The killers vanished into the night, their work complete, leaving behind a trail of bodies and questions that would haunt Pike County for years. By dawn, the first signs of the massacre began to emerge. A family friend, stopping by Christopher Sr.'s trailer to feed the animals, stepped inside and froze. The sight of Christopher and Gary, lifeless in their beds, was a gut punch. The friend's screams shattered the morning quiet, and soon, calls flooded the Pike County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived, expecting a single tragedy, but as they moved from home to home, the scope of the horror unfolded. 8 dead across 4 locations, all shot in the head, most while they slept. The precision was unnerving. No forced entries, no defensive wounds, just execution-style killings. The spared children, a 6-month-old, a 4-day-old and a 3-year-old, were the only survivors, their innocence a stark contrast to the brutality around them. The community reeled as word spread. Pike County, a place where everyone knew everyone, was no stranger to hardship. But this was different. This was personal, targeted, a slaughter that felt like a violation of the unspoken trust that bound the area. Sheriff's deputies, unaccustomed to crime on this scale, called in the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Crime scene technicians swarmed the properties, cataloging shell casings, bullet trajectories, and the eerie absence of chaos. The killers had left little behind. No fingerprints, no obvious clues, just bodies and disabled security cameras. Whispers of motives began to circulate. Was it a drug deal gone wrong? The Rhodens were known to grow marijuana, small-time stuff, but nothing that seemed to warrant this. A family feud. The Rhodens had their share of disputes, but nothing pointed to this level of vengeance. Or was it something deeper, more personal, rooted in the tangled web of small-town relationships? The investigation stretched on, days turning to weeks, then months. The community locked its doors, once trusting neighbors now eyeing each other with suspicion. The surviving Rhodens, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, lived in fear, their grief compounded by the lack of answers. Tips flooded in. Hundreds of interviews were conducted, but the killers remained ghosts. The case grew cold, the weight of it pressing on Pike County like a storm that wouldn't break. It wasn't until 2018 that the truth began to emerge, peeling back layers of deception to reveal a motive as old as time control. The Wagner family, another local clan, was arrested, 4 members charged with orchestrating the murder. At the heart of it was a custody dispute over Hannah Mae, Rhoden's daughter, a 4-year-old spared that night. The Wagners, tied to the Rhodens through marriage and shared history, had wanted the child, and their obsession had spiraled into a plan of unthinkable violence. They had studied the Rhodens' routines, mapped their homes, and executed their plan with chilling precision. The arrests brought relief but no closure. The scars of that night ran too deep. The Rhoden family murders, as they came to be known, shook Pike County to its core. 8 lives stolen in the dead of night, their killers moving like shadows, driven by a twisted desire for control. The case exposed the fragility of trust in a small town where love and loyalty could curdle into something monstrous. Even as the Wagners faced justice, the question lingered. How could a place so quiet harbor such darkness? The stars still hung low over Pike County, but their light felt colder now, a reminder of a night when evil walked Union Hill Road and left a family in ruin. The morning of April 22, 2016 broke over Pike County, Ohio with a deceptive calm. The sun crept above the horizon, casting pale light across the rolling fields and wooded patches that surrounded the Rhoden family's scattered home. Dew clung to the grass, and the air carried the crisp bite of spring. To anyone passing by, the trailers and modest houses along Union Hill Road looked untouched, their windows dark, their yards still. But inside one of those homes, Christopher Rhoden's trailer, the first threads of a nightmare were unraveling. The family friend, stopping by to feed the animals as they often did, pushed open the door and stepped into a scene that would haunt them forever. The quiet of the night had been a lie, and what they found inside would set off a chain of discoveries that would plunge Pike County into a state of dread. The trailer was dim, the curtains drawn, the air heavy with the faint metallic tang of blood. The friends' footsteps faltered as they moved deeper inside, their eyes adjusting to the low light. In the bedroom, Christopher Rhoden Sr., 40, lay in his bed, his body still, his face frozen in the peace of sleep. A single gunshot wound marred his head, the pillow beneath him soaked crimson. He hadn't stirred, hadn't fought. Nearby in another bed, Gary Rhoden, 38, Christopher's cousin, was the same, shot, dead, a bullet to the head, his body untouched by any sign of struggle. The friend's breath caught, a scream trapped in their throat, as they stumbled back, fumbling for their phone. The call to the Pike County Sheriff's Office was frantic, words tumbling over one another as they tried to make sense of the horror. Deputies were dispatched immediately, expecting a tragedy but unprepared for the scale of what was to come. The sheriff's deputies arrived at Christopher's trailer, their radios crackling with urgency. The scene inside confirmed the friend's report. 2 men executed with chilling precision. The shots were close range, likely fired with a suppressed handgun to avoid waking the victims or alerting neighbors. The trailer showed no signs of a break-in, no shattered windows, no splintered door frame. The killers had entered with ease, as if they knew the place well. The security cameras outside, which Christopher had installed to keep an eye on his property, were useless, their wires cut or lenses turned away. Whoever did this had planned meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. The deputies exchanged uneasy glances, their training barely preparing them for a crime of this magnitude in a county where murders were rare. But as they processed the scene, a sinking realization hit. The Rhodens weren't just one household. There were other homes, other family members, scattered across the nearby roads. The call went out to check on the rest of the family, and deputies raced to the next location, a trailer just a few miles away, where Clarence Frankie Rhoden, Christopher's 20-year-old son, lived with his fiancée, Hannah Gilly. Also, the drive felt endless, the narrow roads, winding through fields that now seemed menacing in their stillness. When they reached Frankie's trailer, the door was slightly ajar, a detail that sent a chill through the officers. They stepped inside, weapons drawn, their boots heavy on the thin floor. The air was thick, the silence oppressive. In the bedroom, Frankie lay in his bed, a gunshot wound to his head, his body still as if he'd never woken. Beside him, Hannah was the same. Her life ended with a single shot. Between them, their 6-month-old son lay unharmed, his small body nestled in the blood-soaked sheets, his soft cries the only sound in the room. The deputies' hands shook as they checked the child, confirming he was alive, untouched by the violence that had claimed his parent. The scene was a gut-wrenching paradox, a baby spared amid a slaughter. The deputies moved quickly, their radios buzzing with updates as they coordinated with other units. The discovery at Frankie's trailer raised the body count to 4, and the pattern was unmistakable: targeted,
execution-style killings, all in the dead of night. The killers had moved with a purpose that suggested familiarity, striking while their victims slept, leaving no room for resistance. The spared child added a layer of unease. Why had the killers stopped short of harming him? Was it a calculated choice, or simply a lack of interest in the innocent? The questions piled up, but there was no time to linger. There were more Rhodens to check on, more homes that might hold the same grim truth. The next stop was Dana Rhoden's home, where Christopher's ex-wife, 37, lived with their daughter Hannah Mae Rhoden. The deputies approached with dread, their flashlights cutting through the morning mist. The house was quiet, its exterior unremarkable, but the unlocked door hinted at what lay inside. Dana was found in her bedroom, a single gunshot to the head, her body still in the position of sleep. Nearby, Hannah Mae lay dead, her young life ended with the same brutal efficiency. Her newborn daughter, just 4 days old, was beside her, crying softly, her tiny form untouched by the violence. The deputies' stomachs churned as they secured the scene, the sight of another spared child deepening the mystery. The killers had struck 3 homes now, leaving 6 dead and 2 infants alive, a pattern that defied easy explanation. The final stop was Kenneth Rhoden's trailer, where Christopher's younger brother, 44, lived alone. The deputies were numb by now, their minds racing to process the scale of the crime. Kenneth's trailer was isolated, surrounded by woods, its solitude a perfect target for the killer's silent approach. The door was unlocked, the interior undisturbed. Inside, Kenneth lay in his bed, a single gunshot wound to the head, his death as swift and precise as the others. The trailer showed no signs of a struggle, no evidence of theft or chaos. The killers had come for one thing: to end lives. They had left nothing behind but bodies and question. By mid-morning, Pike County was a hive of chaos. The sheriff's office was overwhelmed, their small staff stretched thin as they secured 4 crime scenes. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was called in, their forensic teams descending on the properties to collect evidence. Shell casings were sparse, suggesting the killers had been careful to clean up. Bullet trajectories confirmed close-range shots, likely with handguns, possibly silenced. The disabled security cameras were a chilling detail, pointing to premeditation and inside knowledge. The community, waking to the news, was paralyzed with fear. Pike County, with its population of just 20, the spared children, a 6-month-old, a 4-day-old, and a 3-year-old, found later at another relative's home, were the only survivors, their presence a haunting anomaly in the carnage. Whispers of motives began to circulate as investigators worked. The Rhodens were known to grow small amounts of marijuana, a common side hustle in rural Ohio, but nothing suggested ties to a cartel or major drug operation. A family feud seemed possible. The Rhodens had their share of disputes over land or money, but the precision of the killings felt too cold, too calculated for a personal grudge. Some wondered if it was a hired hit, but the lack of evidence left every theory hanging. The community locked its doors, once open homes now fortified with fear. Neighbors who had waved to each other for years now avoided eye contact, the trust that defined Pike County eroding under the weight of the unknown. The investigation stretched on, the crime scenes yielding little beyond the bodies themselves. Hundreds of tips poured in, each one chased down with dwindling hope. The Rhoden's surviving family members, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, lived in a state of constant dread, their grief compounded by the lack of answers. The case grew cold, the mystery of that night festering like a wound. It wasn't until 2018 that a break came, when the Wagner family, another local clan tied to the Rhodens through marriage and a bitter custody dispute, was arrested. The motive, investigators would later reveal, centered on Hannah Mae's daughter, a child the Wagners wanted control over. The killings, they alleged, were a ruthless bid to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. The discovery at Christopher's trailer had been the first domino, setting off a cascade of horror that would redefine Pike County. The killers had moved like specters, their plan executed with a precision that left no room for error. 8 lives were taken, their deaths, a calculated act of erasure. The spared children, innocent in their cribs, were a haunting reminder of the killer's strange restraint. As Pike County grappled with the aftermath, the question lingered. How could a place so small, so familiar, harbor a darkness so vast? The trailers along Union Hill Road stood silent, their walls holding secrets that would take years to unravel, their shadows a testament to a night when death came calling.
The sun was barely above the horizon on April 22nd, 2016, when Pike County, Ohio, began to stir under the weight of an unfolding nightmare. The rural landscape, with its patchwork of fields and dense woods, held a deceptive stillness, the kind that masked the horror seeping out from the Rhoden family's homes. Deputies from the Pike County Sheriff's Office were already reeling from the discoveries at Christopher Rhoden Sr. Owen's trailer, where he and his cousin Gary lay dead, and at Frankie Rhoden's home, where Frankie and his fiancée, Hannah Gilly, had been executed in their sleep. The body count stood at 4, but the knot of dread in the officers' stomachs told them this was far from over. The Rhodens were a sprawling family, their lives tethered across a handful of properties along Union Hill Road and nearby stretches. With each passing minute, the fear grew that more homes held the same grim fate. The deputies' radios crackled with urgency as they coordinated their next move. The air was thick with the scent of dew and earth, but it did nothing to dispel the chill that had settled over the responders. They sped toward the next known Rhoden residence, a modest house where Dana Rhoden, 37, Christopher's ex-wife, lived with their daughter, Hannah Mae Rhoden. The drive was short, but felt eternal, the winding roads flanked by silent fields that seemed to watch their approach. The house came into view, its exterior unassuming, a single-story structure, with faded siding and a small porch cluttered with everyday items. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, and the front door, like the others, was unlocked. The deputies exchanged glances, their hands tightening on their weapons. They had seen too much already to hope for anything but the worst. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the ears. The deputies moved cautiously, their boots scuffing softly against the worn floorboards. The living room was untouched, a scattering of toys and baby bottles hinting at the life that had filled the space just hours ago. A faded couch sat against one wall, a coffee table cluttered with magazines, and a half-empty mug of coffee, now cold. The normalcy of it was jarring, a cruel contrast to the dread creeping through the officers' veins. They pushed deeper into the house, toward the bedrooms, their flashlights cutting sharp beams through the dimness. The air felt heavy, thick with an unspoken promise of horror. In the first bedroom, they found Dana. She lay in her bed, her body still, her face serene except for the single gunshot wound to her head. The blood had soaked into the pillow, pooling beneath her, a dark stain against the pale sheets. She hadn't stirred, hadn't fought. The shot was close range, precise, delivered with a coldness that suggested the killer had stood over her, watching her sleep, before ending her life. The deputies' breaths were shallow as they moved to the next room, where Hannah Mae slept. The door creaked as they pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet. Hannah, just 19, lay in her bed, her young life extinguished with the same brutal efficiency. A single bullet to the head. Beside her, her newborn daughter, only 4 days old, was crying softly, her tiny body nestled against her mother's lifeless form. The baby's whimpers were a gut punch, a fragile thread of life in a room claimed by death. The deputies' hands trembled as they checked the infant, their fingers brushing against her soft skin to confirm she was unharmed. They radioed for backup to secure the child, their voices low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the ghosts lingering in the house. The sight of the newborn surrounded by blood and stillness was almost too much to bear, a life spared in a slaughter that showed no mercy. The scene at Dana's home brought the body count to 6,
and the pattern was undeniable. The killers had struck with ruthless precision, targeting their victims in their sleep, leaving no room for resistance or escape. The shots were clean, likely fired with a suppressed handgun to avoid waking the household or alerting neighbors. The absence of struggle was chilling. No overturned furniture, no scattered belongings, just bodies left where they fell. The spared infant, like the 6-month-old found at Frankie's trailer, deepened the mystery. Why had the killers stopped short of harming the children? Was it a calculated choice, a line they wouldn't cross, or simply indifference to the innocent? The questions gnawed at the deputies as they secured the scene, their minds racing to make sense of a crime that felt both intimate and alien. The house itself offered little in the way of answer. The floors were worn but clean, the walls adorned with family photos, smiling faces at picnics, birthdays, moments of a life now erased. A child's drawing was pinned to the fridge, a crayon sketch of a house under a bright sun, a cruel irony given the darkness that had descended. The deputies noted the absence of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows. The killers had entered with ease, as if they knew the layout, the routines, the vulnerabilities of the Rhoden family. Outside, the security cameras that might have caught a glimpse of the intruders were useless, their lenses turned or wires cut, a detail that pointed to meticulous planning. Whoever did this wasn't impulsive. They were executioners, moving through the night with a purpose that left no trace. As the deputies worked, the weight of the morning pressed harder. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation had been called in, their forensic teams en route to process the growing number of crime scenes. The sheriff's office was stretched thin, their small staff unprepared for a massacre of this scale in a county where violent crime was a rarity. The radio buzzed with updates from other units, confirming that the horror wasn't confined to Dana's home. The pattern was consistent: targeted killings, close-range shots, no signs of struggle. The deputies at Dana's house moved methodically, preserving the scene for the investigators who would soon arrive. They catalogued the bullet holes, the blood spatter, the eerie calm of a home frozen in time. The newborn was carefully removed, handed to a social worker, who arrived with a blanket and a look of stunned disbelief. The child's cries faded as she was carried away, leaving the house to its ghosts. By late morning, Pike County was a cauldron of fear and confusion. News of the killings was spreading, whispered in gas stations and diners, the details growing more horrific with each retelling. The community, a tight-knit enclave where everyone knew the Rhodens, was unraveled. Doors that were once left unlocked were now bolted, windows covered, as neighbors grappled with the realization that something monstrous had walked among them. The deputies moving between crime scenes were haunted by what they'd seen: 6 bodies, all shot in the head, all killed in their sleep. The spared children, a 6-month-old at Frankie's, a 4-day-old at Dana's, and a 3-year-old found later at another relative's home, were a haunting anomaly, their survival a question mark in a case with no easy answers. Investigators began to piece together the scope of the crime. The Rhodens were known to grow small amounts of marijuana, a side hustle common in rural Ohio, but nothing suggested ties to a cartel or major drug operation. The precision of the killings pointed away from a random hit, leaning instead towards something personal, rooted in the tangled web of small-town relationships. A family feud was considered. The Rhodens had their share of disputes over land or money, but the cold efficiency of the murders felt too calculated for a simple grudge. Some whispered of a hired hit, but the lack of evidence left every theory dangling. The disabled security cameras were a critical clue, suggesting the killers had intimate knowledge of the family's habits and defenses. They had planned for weeks, perhaps months, studying their targets, mapping their homes, and striking when resistance was impossible. The investigation was a labyrinth of dead ends. Hundreds of tips flooded the sheriff's office, each one chased down with dwindling hope. The surviving Rhodens, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, lived in a state of constant dread, their grief compounded by the absence of answers. The community, once defined by trust and familiarity, was fracturing. Neighbors avoided eye contact, their waves replaced by suspicion. The case grew cold, the weight of it pressing on Pike County like a storm that refused to break. It wasn't until 2018 that a crack appeared in the mystery, when the Wagner family, Another local clan tied to the Rhodens through marriage was arrested. The motive, investigators would reveal, was a bitter custody dispute over Hannah May's daughter. The 3-year-old spared that night. The Wagners had wanted control, and their obsession had spiraled into a plan of unthinkable violence. The discovery at Dana's home was a pivotal piece of the puzzle, a snapshot of a family targeted with surgical precision. The killers had moved like shadows, their shots clean, their exits silent. The spared infants were a chilling enigma, a choice that hinted at a code within the killer's ruthlessness. As Pike County mourned, the question lingered: how could a place so small harbor a darkness so vast? Dana's house, with its crayon drawings and cold coffee, stood as a tomb, its walls holding the secrets of a night when death came calling, and left only silence in its wake. The morning of April 22, 2016, in Pike County, Ohio, was a jagged wound, each new discovery tearing deeper into the fabric of the small community. The sun climbed higher, its light doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the rural landscape. The fields and woods along Union Hill Road stood silent, their stillness a cruel mockery of the chaos unfolding within the Rhoden family's homes. Deputies from the Pike County Sheriff's Office were already numb from the horrors they'd found. Christopher Rhoden and his cousin Gary, executed in their trailer. Frankie Rhoden and his fiancée Hannah Gelly, shot dead with their 6-month-old son spared between them. And Dana Rhoden and her daughter Hannah May killed in their sleep. Hannah's 4-day-old daughter left crying beside her mother's body. 6 dead across 3 homes, each scene a mirror of cold precision. But the Rhodens' reach extended further, and the deputies knew there was one more home to check. Kenneth Rhoden's trailer, isolated and alone. A final stop in a morning that felt like a descent into hell. The drive to Kenneth's place was a blur, the narrow roads winding through dense woods that seemed to close in around the deputies' vehicles. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but it carried an undercurrent of dread, as if the land itself knew what had happened. Kenneth, 44, Christopher's younger brother, lived alone in a trailer set back from the road, its solitude a reflection of his quiet, solitary nature. He was a man of few words, content with his own company, his trailer a haven in the sprawling network of the Rhoden family. As the deputies pulled up, the trailer's weathered exterior gave nothing away. No broken windows, no signs of disturbance. The door was slightly ajar, a detail that sent a shiver through the officers. They had seen too much already to believe it was an oversight. They approached with weapons drawn, their footsteps crunching on the gravel drive. The trailer was small, its metal siding rusted in places, a single light bulb flickering above the porch. The deputies called out Kenneth's name, their voices swallowed by the morning quiet. No response. They pushed the door open, the creak of its hinges like a warning. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with the faint metallic scent that had become all too familiar. The living area was sparse, a worn couch, a small TV, a stack of car magazines on a coffee table. Everything was in place, untouched, as if life had simply paused. The deputies moved toward the bedroom, their flashlights cutting through the dimness, their hearts pounding with the certainty of what they would find. In the bedroom, Kenneth lay in his bed, his body still, his face calm, except for the single gunshot wound to his head. The blood had pooled beneath him, staining the mattress, a dark halo around his lifeless form. Like the others, he hadn't stirred, hadn't fought. The shot was close range, precise, likely delivered with a suppressed handgun to avoid any sound that might carry through the thin walls. The deputies stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the scene pressing against them. Kenneth's trailer was the 4th crime scene, and the pattern was unmistakable. Execution-style killings. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. The killers had moved with a chilling familiarity, as if they knew every detail of the Rhoden family's lives, their homes, their routines, their vulnerabilities. The deputies searched the trailer for clues, their movements methodical despite the growing sense of overwhelm. The bedroom was bare, with a single dresser, and a small mirror reflecting the grim scene. A pair of work boots sat by the door, caked with mud from the fields, a reminder of Kenneth's quiet life. There was no sign of a robbery, no missing valuables, no overturned furniture. The killers had come for one thing: to end Kenneth's life. Outside, The security cameras that might have captured their approach were disabled, their wires cut with the same precision seen at the other homes. The deputies noted the detail, their minds racing to connect the whoever did this had planned meticulously, studying their targets, ensuring no trace of their presence remained. The discovery of Kenneth's body brought the death toll to 7, and the scope of the massacre was staggering. The Pike County Sheriff's Office, a small department unaccustomed to violent crime, was stretched to its limits. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation had been called in, their forensic teams now fanning out across the 4 crime scenes, collecting shell casings, photographing blood spatter, and documenting the eerie absence of chaos. The deputies at Kenneth's trailer worked in silence, their radios crackling with updates from the other sites. The pattern was consistent. Single shots to the head, victims killed in their sleep, no defensive wounds. The spared children, a 6-month-old at Frankie's, a 4-day-old at Dana's, and a 3-year-old found safe at another relative's home, were a haunting anomaly, their survival a question that gnawed at everyone. As the morning wore on, Pike County descended into a state of collective shock. Word of the killing spread like wildfire, whispered in hushed tones at gas stations, churches, and corner stores. The Rhodens were a known family, their roots deep in the community, their lives intertwined with those around. The idea that someone could target them with such brutality was unthinkable. Neighbors who had once left their doors unlocked now bolted them, their trust eroded by the realization that a killer or killers had walked among them. The deputies moving between crime scenes felt the weight of the community's fear, their own exhaustion tempered by the need to keep going. They knew the answers lay somewhere in the details, but the scenes were frustratingly clean, the killers leaving little behind but bodies and questions. Investigators began to piece together the timeline. The killings had likely occurred in the early hours of April 22, between midnight and dawn, when the Rhodens were most vulnerable. The use of suppressors suggested a level of sophistication, as did the disabled security cameras. The lack of forced entry pointed to someone familiar with the family, someone who knew which doors were left unlocked, which cameras to avoid. The Rhodens were known to grow small amounts of marijuana, a common practice in rural Ohio, but nothing suggested ties to a major drug operation that would warrant such a calculated. A family feud was another possibility. Disputes over land or money were not uncommon, but the precision of the killings felt too cold, too deliberate for a personal grudge. Some whispered of a hired hit, but the absence of evidence made every theory feel like grasping at shadows. The spared children were a focal point of confusion. Why had the killers left them unharmed? The 6-month-old found between Frankie and Hannah, the 4-day-old beside Hannah Mae, and the 3-year-old safe elsewhere suggested a deliberate choice. Was it a moral line the killers wouldn't cross, or simply a lack of interest in the innocent? The question hung over the investigation like a fog, complicating every attempt to understand the motive. The deputies at Kenneth's trailer, like those at the other scenes, felt the weight of those questions, their minds racing to make sense of a crime that defied logic. The trailer, with its sparse furnishings and quiet solitude, felt like a tomb, its walls holding the secrets of a night that had changed Pike County forever. By midday, the crime scenes were crawling with investigators, forensic teams combing through the trailers and houses for anything that might point to the killers. Shell casings were rare, suggesting the perpetrators had been careful to clean up. Bullet trajectories confirmed close-range shots, likely with handguns possibly silenced. The disabled cameras were a critical clue pointing to premeditation and inside knowledge. The community, meanwhile, was unraveling. Schools were locked down, residents urged to stay vigilant. The Rhodens' surviving family members, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, were consumed by grief and fear, their lives upended by a loss they couldn't comprehend. The sheriff's office fielded hundreds of tips, each one chased down with dwindling hope, the case growing colder with every passing hour. It wasn't until 2018 that the truth began to emerge, when the Wagner family, another local clan tied to the Rhodens through marriage, was arrested. The motive investigators would reveal was a bitter custody dispute over Hannah Mae's daughter, the 3-year-old spared that night. The Wagners had wanted control, and their obsession had spiraled into a plan of unthinkable violence. They had studied the Rhodens' lives, mapped their homes, and executed their plan with chilling precision, leaving 7 dead and a community shattered. Kenneth's trailer, the final stop in the killer's deadly circuit, was a testament to their ruthlessness. The single gunshot, the undisturbed solitude, the disabled cameras, all spoke of a plan carried out with surgical accuracy. As Pike County mourned, the question lingered: how could a place so quiet, so familiar, harbor a darkness so vast? Kenneth's trailer stood as a silent witness, its walls holding the echo of a night when death came calling, and left only ghosts in its wake.
The morning of April 22, 2016, in Pike County, Ohio, was a descent into an abyss that grew darker with each passing hour. The sun, now climbing toward its zenith, cast a pale light over the rural landscape, but its warmth couldn't touch the cold dread that gripped the community. The fields and woods along Union Hill Road stood silent, their stillness a cruel facade, hiding the carnage within the Rhoden family's homes. Deputies from the Pike County Sheriff's Office were reeling, their minds and bodies stretched to breaking by the discoveries that had come in relentless waves. Christopher Rhoden Sr. and his cousin Gary, executed in their trailer. Frankie Rhoden and his fiancée, Hannah Gilley, shot dead with their 6-month-old son spared between them. Dana Rhoden and her daughter, Hannah Mae, killed in their sleep. Hannah's 4-day-old daughter, left crying beside her. And Kenneth Rhoden, found alone in his trailer, a single bullet to his head. 7 dead across 4 homes, each scene a chilling mirror of precision and brutality. But the question lingered: were there more? The Rhodens were a sprawling clan, and the deputies, now joined by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, braced for the possibility that the horror wasn't over. The air was thick with tension as investigators coordinated their efforts, their radios a constant hum of clipped updates and urgent directives. The rural roads, usually quiet, were alive with the flash of police lights and the rumble of forensic vans. The community, waking to the news of the massacre, was unraveling, its once open trust replaced by a creeping paranoia. The deputies had confirmed 7 victims, but the pattern of the killings, targeted, methodical, executed in the dead of night, suggested a plan so meticulous it demanded answers. Was there another home, another Rhoden, waiting to be found? The fear of another scene drove them forward, even as exhaustion clawed at their resolve. For now, though, the focus shifted to the 4th location, Kenneth Rhoden's trailer, where the latest discovery had cemented the scale of the tragedy. It was here, in the solitude of Kenneth's isolated home, that the killers had completed their grim circuit, leaving a trail of bodies and a community on the brink. Kenneth's trailer sat on a quiet stretch of land, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow the light. The deputies who arrived at the scene were already haunted by the images of the previous homes, their minds struggling to process the sheer scope of the violence. The trailer was small, its metal siding weathered by years of exposure, a single flickering bulb above the porch casting long shadows. The door was slightly ajar, a detail that had become a chilling hallmark of the killings. The deputies approached with weapons drawn, their boots crunching on the gravel drive, their voices low as they called out Kenneth's name. No answer came, only the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. They pushed the door open, the creak of its hinges slicing through the silence like a blade. Inside, the air was heavy, tinged with the now familiar metallic scent of blood. The living area was sparse, a worn couch, a small TV, a stack of car magazines on a coffee table, all untouched, as if Kenneth had simply stepped away for a moment. The deputies moved toward the bedroom, their flashlights cutting sharp beams through the dimness. Their hearts pounded, each step a countdown to the inevitable. In the bedroom, they found Kenneth, 44, lying in his bed, his body still, his face calm, except for the single gunshot wound to his head. The blood had pooled beneath him, soaking the mattress, a dark stain against the pale sheets. Like the others, he hadn't stirred, hadn't fought. The shot was close range, precise, likely delivered with a suppressed handgun to avoid any sound that might carry through the thin walls. The deputies stood frozen, the weight of the scene pressing against them. Kenneth's death was the seventh, but the finality of it offered no relief. The trailer, with its quiet solitude, felt like a tomb, its walls holding the echo of a night when death had moved with surgical precision. The scene was eerily familiar. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no evidence of theft. The killers had come for one thing: to end Kenneth's life. The bedroom was bare, with a single dresser and a small mirror reflecting the grim tableau. A pair of work boots caked with mud from the fields sat by the door, a poignant reminder of Kenneth's unassuming life. Outside, the security cameras that might have captured the intruders were disabled, their wires cut with the same care seen at the other home. The deputies noted the detail, their minds racing to connect the pieces of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each discovery. Whoever did this had known the Rhodens intimately, their homes, their routines, their vulnerability. The precision was chilling, the absence of chaos a testament to the killer's cold efficiency. As the deputies secured the scene, forensic teams from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation arrived, their equipment clattering as they set to work. Shell casings were scarce, suggesting the killers had been meticulous in cleaning up. Bullet trajectories confirmed close-range shots, likely with handguns, possibly silenced to avoid detection. The disabled cameras were a critical clue, pointing to premeditation and inside knowledge. The deputies moved through the trailer, cataloging every detail: the angle of the bullet hole, the position of Kenneth's body, the untouched belongings. The sparseness of the trailer only deepened the sense of violation. This was a man who lived quietly, alone, yet had been targeted with the same ruthlessness as the others. The question of why hung heavy, unanswered, as the investigators worked in silence. By midday, Pike County was a crucible of fear. The news of 7 murders, soon to be 8, as the final victim would be confirmed, had spread, shattering the community's sense of safety. The Rhodens were a known family, their lives woven into the fabric of the county. They were working class, rooted in the land, their disputes and dramas familiar to those who shared their small world. The idea that someone could target them with such brutality was unthinkable, yet the evidence was undeniable. Neighbors who had once waved across fields now locked their doors, their trust eroded by the realization that a killer or killers had moved among them, unseen. Schools were locked down, residents urged to stay vigilant, as the sheriff's office fielded a flood of calls from frightened locals. The investigation was a race against time, with the sheriff's office stretched to its limits. The small department, unaccustomed to violent crime on this scale, leaned heavily on the state investigators now swarming the scene. The pattern was clear: execution-style killings, all in the dead of night, all targeting the Rhoden family. The spared children, a 6-month-old at Frankie's, a 4-day-old at Dana's, and a 3-year-old found safe elsewhere, were a haunting anomaly, their survival a question that gnawed at investigators. Why had the killers left them unharmed? Was it a moral line, a calculated choice, or simple indifference? The absence of answers was maddening, each new detail deepening the mystery rather than resolving it. Theories swirled, as investigators were. The Rhodens were known to grow small amounts of marijuana, a common side hustle in rural Ohio, but nothing pointed to a cartel or major drug operation that would justify such a massacre. A family feud was considered. Disputes over land or money were not uncommon, but the cold precision of the killings felt too deliberate for a personal grudge. Some whispered of a hired hit, but the lack of evidence left every theory dangling. The disabled security cameras suggested the killers had intimate knowledge of the family's defenses, pointing to someone close, someone trusted. The deputies, haunted by the scenes they'd witnessed, felt the weight of the community's fear.
their own exhaustion tempered by the need to find answers. The surviving Rhodens, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, were consumed by grief and terror. The community, once defined by open doors and shared stories, was fracturing, its trust replaced by suspicion. The investigation stretched on, with hundreds of tips leading nowhere, the case growing colder with each passing day. It wasn't until 2018 that a breakthrough came, when the Wagner family, another local clan tied to the Rhodens through marriage, was arrested. The motive, investigators would reveal, was a bitter custody dispute over Hannah May's daughter, the 3-year-old spared that night. The Wagners had wanted control, and their obsession had spiraled into a plan of unthinkable violence, executed with chilling precision. Kenneth's trailer, the final stop in the killer's deadly circuit, was a testament to their ruthlessness. The single gunshot, the undisturbed solitude, the disabled cameras, all spoke of a plan carried out with surgical accuracy. As Pike County mourned, the question lingered: how could a place so quiet, so familiar, harbor a darkness so vast? Kenneth's trailer stood as a silent witness, its walls holding the echo of a night when death came calling, and left only ghosts in its wake. By midday, on April 22, 2016, Pike County, Ohio, was a community unmoored, its quiet rural rhythm shattered by a horror that defied comprehension. The sun hung high, casting harsh light over the fields and woods along Union Hill Road, but its warmth couldn't pierce the chill that had settled over the county. The Rhoden family, a sprawling clan woven into the fabric of this small town, had been decimated in a single night. 7 bodies had been found across 4 homes. Christopher Rhoden Sr. and his cousin Gary, executed in their trailer. Frankie Rhoden and his fiancée Hannah Gilly shot dead with their 6-month-old son spared between them. Dana Rhoden and her daughter Hannah May killed in their sleep. Hannah's 4-day-old daughter left crying beside her, and Kenneth Rhoden, alone in his trailer, a single bullet to his head. But the count wasn't final. As deputies and investigators from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation raced between crime scenes, a final discovery confirmed the worst. An 8th victim, Chris Rhoden Jr., 16, found dead in his father's home, shot like the other. The scale of the massacre was unprecedented, and Pike County was spiraling into panic, its people grappling with a question that hung like a storm cloud: who could do this, and why? The sheriff's office was a hive of frenetic activity, its small staff overwhelmed by the magnitude of the crime. Radios crackled with updates, forensic teams swarmed the properties, and the air was thick with the scent of fear and diesel from the arriving vans. The community, once defined by open doors and neighborly trust, was locking itself down. Schools were placed on lockdown, parents pulling their children close, while whispers of the killings spread through gas stations, diners, and church. The Rhodens were not just a family, they were a fixture, their lives intertwined with those around them through work, love, and the small dramas of rural life. The idea that someone could target them with such ruthless precision was unthinkable, yet the evidence was undeniable. 8 murders, all execution style, all in the dead of night, all in their homes. The crime scenes told a chillingly consistent story. Each victim had been shot in the head, most while they slept, with no signs of struggle or defense. The shots were close range, likely fired with suppressed handguns to avoid detection. There was no forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, suggesting the killers had intimate knowledge of the Rhodens' homes. Security cameras, installed to protect the family's properties, were disabled, their wires cut or lenses turned, a detail that pointed to meticulous planning. The killers had moved like ghosts, striking between midnight and dawn, when the family was most vulnerable. The spared children, a 6-month-old, a 4-day-old, and a 3-year-old found safe at another relative's home, were a haunting anomaly, their survival a puzzle that deepened the mystery. Why had the killers left them unharmed? Was it a calculated choice, a moral line, or simply indifference to the innocent? Investigators from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation worked feverishly, their forensic teams combing through the trailers and houses for any trace of the killer. Shell casings were scarce, suggesting the perpetrators had been careful to clean up. Bullet trajectories confirmed the precision of the shots, each one delivered with a cold efficiency that spoke of intent, not impulse. The disabled cameras were a critical clue, pointing to someone who knew the family's defenses, their routines, their lives. The absence of chaos, no overturned furniture, no signs of theft, ruled out robbery or random violence. This was personal, targeted, a massacre rooted in something deep and dark. But what? The question gnawed at the investigators as they processed the scenes, their gloved hands cataloging blood spatter and bullet holes, their minds racing to find a thread that could unravel the truth. The community was unraveling, its sense of safety shattered. Pike County, with its population of just 28,000, was no stranger to hardship. But this was different. This was a violation, a betrayal of the trust that bound neighbors together. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now bolted, windows covered with curtains drawn tight. Neighbors who had waved across fields now avoided eye contact, their conversations hushed, their eyes darting with suspicion. The Rhodens were known to grow small amounts of marijuana, a common side hustle in rural Ohio, but nothing suggested ties to a cartel or major drug operation that would warrant such a slaughter. A family feud was another possibility. Disputes over land, money, or personal grudges were not uncommon, but the cold precision of the killings felt too calculated for a simple spat. Some whispered of a hired hit, but the lack of evidence left every theory hanging, a shadow on the wall with no source. The spared children were a focal point of confusion and speculation. The 6-month-old found between Frankie and Hannah, the 4-day-old beside Hannah Mae, and the 3-year-old safe elsewhere were miracles amid the carnage, but their survival raised more questions than answers. Had the killers spared them deliberately, or was it an oversight in their ruthless plan? The investigators pondered the possibility of a code, some unwritten rule that stopped short of harming the innocent, but it felt like grasping at straw. The children were now in the care of social workers, their cries a haunting reminder of the lives torn apart. The surviving Rhodens, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, were consumed by grief and fear, their lives upended by a loss they couldn't comprehend. They huddled together, guarded by deputies as the community looked on, helpless and afraid. The sheriff's office fielded a flood of tips, each one chased down with dwindling hope. Hundreds of interviews were conducted. Neighbors and acquaintances questioned about the Rhodens' lives, their enemies, their secrets. The family was well known, their disputes and dramas part of the local fabric, but nothing pointed to a motive for such a massacre. The marijuana angle was explored, but the scale of their operation was small, unlikely to attract the kind of attention that would lead to 8 executions. The possibility of a family feud lingered, but the Rhodens' conflict seemed too minor, too ordinary to explain the brutality. The investigators' frustration grew, the case a labyrinth of dead ends and unanswered questions. The community, desperate for answers, began to fracture, its trust eroded by the realization that the killers had walked among them unseen. As the day wore on, the crime scenes became a grim pilgrimage, each trailer and house a testament to the killer's precision. The investigators worked in silence, their faces drawn, their hands steady despite the horror. The trailers, with their worn furniture and personal touches, family photos, children's toys, a half-empty coffee mug, felt like tombs, frozen in the moment of death. The community gathered at churches and community centers, seeking solace, but the fear was palpable. Parents held their children closer, their eyes scanning the horizon for threats that couldn't be seen. The media descended, their cameras and questions adding to the chaos, as Pike County became the epicenter of a national story that defied explanation. The investigation stretched into weeks, then months, with no arrests, no suspects, no answers. The case grew cold, the weight of it pressing on Pike County like a storm that refused to break. The surviving Rhodens lived in a state of constant dread, their grief compounded by the absence of justice. The community, once a haven of familiarity, was now a place of shadows, where every stranger was a potential threat. It wasn't until 2018 that a breakthrough came, when the Wagner family, another local clan tied to the Rhodens through marriage, was arrested. The motive, investigators would reveal, was a bitter custody dispute over Hannah May's daughter, the 3-year-old spared that night. The Wagners had wanted control, and their obsession had spiraled into a plan of unthinkable violence, executed with chilling precision. The spared children, innocent in their cribs, were a haunting reminder of the killer's strange restraint. The trailers and houses along Union Hill Road stood as silent witnesses, their walls holding the secrets of a night when death moved through the darkness, leaving only questions and fear in its wake. As the community mourned, the truth remained elusive, a shadow that lingered long after the blood had dried, a reminder that even in the quiet of rural Ohio, evil could find a home.
The sun had long since set on Pike County, Ohio, by the time the full weight of the April 22, 2016 massacre settled into the community's bones. The rural landscape, with its rolling fields and dense woods, had once felt like a sanctuary, a place where neighbors knew each other's secrets and shared their burdens. But that illusion was shattered, replaced by a suffocating fear that lingered like a fog over Union Hill Road. 8 members of the Rhoden family, Christopher Rhoden Sr., 40, his cousin Gary Rhoden, 38, his son Frankie Rhoden, 20, Frankie's fiancée, Hannah Gilley, 20, his ex-wife Dana Rhoden, 37, his daughter Hannah May Rhoden, 19, his son Chris Rhoden Jr., 16, and his brother Kenneth Rhoden, 44, had been executed in their homes, each killed with a single gunshot to the head while they slept. The killers had moved with chilling precision, leaving no signs of struggle, no forced entry, only disabled security cameras and 3 spared children, a 6-month-old, a 4-day-old, and a 3-year-old. For 2 years, Pike County lived under the shadow of that night, the mystery of the murders festering like an open wound. The truth, when it finally emerged in 2018, was as shocking as it was monstrous, revealing a darkness rooted not in distant enemies, but in the heart of another local family. The investigation had been a grueling marathon, stretching the Pike County Sheriff's Office and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation to their limits. The small county, with its population of just 28,000, was unprepared for a crime of this magnitude. The crime scenes, 4 trailers and houses scattered across the rural roads, yielded frustratingly little. Shell casings were scarce, suggesting the killers had been meticulous in cleaning up. Bullet trajectories confirmed close-range shots, likely with suppressed handguns, delivered with a cold efficiency that spoke of planning, not impulse. The disabled security cameras were a critical clue, pointing to someone with intimate knowledge of the Rhodens' lives, their homes, their routines, their defenses. The spared children were a haunting enigma, their survival a question that gnawed at investigators. Was it a moral line the killers wouldn't cross, or simply indifference to the innocent? Hundreds of tips flooded in, each one chased down with dwindling hope, as the community grappled with a fear that refused to fade. Pike County had changed in the aftermath. The once open community where doors were left unlocked and neighbors shared meals was now a place of suspicion. Families fortified their homes, their trust eroded by the realization that the killers had walked among them. The Rhodens were a known family, their lives woven into the county's fabric through work, love, and the small dramas of rural life. Their deaths felt like a betrayal, a violation of the unspoken bond that held the community together. The surviving Rhodens, those who lived elsewhere or were spared by chance, lived in a state of constant dread, their grief compounded by the absence of answers. The media descended, their cameras and questions amplifying the chaos, as Pike County became a national story, a rural nightmare that captivated and horrified. Investigators explored every angle. The Rhodens were known to grow small amounts of marijuana, a common side hustle in rural Ohio, but nothing suggested ties to a cartel or major drug operation that would warrant such a massacre. A family feud was considered. Disputes over land, money, or personal grudges were not uncommon, but the precision of the killings felt too calculated for a simple spat. The possibility of a hired hit lingered, but the lack of evidence left every theory dangling. The community whispered their own theories, from revenge to jealousy to something darker, but the case grew cold, the weight of it pressing on Pike County like a storm that refused to break. The trailers and houses along Union Hill Road stood as silent tombs, their walls holding the secrets of a night that had changed everything. Then in November 2018 the truth began to emerge, peeling back layers of deception to reveal a motive as old as time control. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, working with the Sheriff's Office, announced the arrests of 4 members of the Wagner family: George Billy Wagner III, 47, his wife Angela Wagner, 40. The Wagners were no strangers to the Rhodens. They were tied through marriage and shared history, their lives entangled in the complex web of small-town relationships. The motive, investigators revealed, was a bitter custody dispute over Hannah Mae Rhoden's daughter, Sophia, the 3-year-old spared that night. Jake Wagner, Sophia's father, had been in a relationship with Hannah Mae, and the Wagners wanted control of the child. What began as a personal conflict had spiraled into a meticulously planned massacre, a chilling act of violence to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. The revelation sent shockwaves through Pike County. The Wagners were a local family, known to many, their presence as familiar as the Rhodens. The idea that they could orchestrate such a slaughter was almost incomprehensible, yet the evidence was damning. Investigators uncovered a trail of planning that stretched back months, possibly years. The Wagners had studied the Rhodens' routines, mapped their homes, and prepared their weapons, handguns fitted with homemade suppressors to muffle the shots. They had disabled the security cameras, ensuring no trace of their movements would be captured. The killings were carried out in the early hours of April 22, when the family was most vulnerable, each shot delivered with a precision that spoke of practice and intent. The spared children, investigators believed, were a deliberate choice, a line the Wagners wouldn't cross, though the reason remained murky. Perhaps a twisted sense of morality, or simply a focus on their primary targets. The arrests brought a flood of details that painted a chilling picture. The Wagners had lived a double life, presenting themselves as neighbors while plotting a massacre. They had purchased ammunition and equipment, including materials to build suppressors in the months leading up to the killing. Angela Wagner, the matriarch, was alleged to have helped plan the operation, her role as calculated as her son's. Billy Wagner, the patriarch, was accused of leading the execution, his hands as bloody as those of his family. George I and Jake, the younger Wagners, were deeply involved, their actions driven by a shared obsession with control over Sophia. The custody dispute, investigators said, had festered, fueled by resentment and a refusal to compromise. The Wagners saw the Rhodens as obstacles, and their solution was to erase them. The community reeled at the news. The Wagners' arrest was a relief, but it came with a new kind of horror, the realization that the killers had been neighbors, people who had shared the same roads, the same stores, the same small-town life. The betrayal cut deep, shattering what little trust remained in Pike County. The surviving Rhodens, already scarred by loss, faced a fresh wave of pain, their grief now tangled with the shock of knowing the killers' faces. The community gathered in churches and homes, trying to make sense of a crime that defied understanding. The media frenzy intensified, reporters digging into the Wagners' lives, their connections to the Rhodens, and the dark path that led to that fateful night. The legal process was slow, the case complex and sprawling. The Wagners faced a litany of charges: aggravated murder, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and more. Prosecutors painted a picture of a family united in their ruthlessness, their bond forged in blood. The evidence was overwhelming: phone records, forensic analysis, and confessions from some family members who turned against each other under pressure. Jake Wagner and Angela Wagner would later plead guilty, their plea deals sparing them the death penalty, but ensuring life in prison. George I and Billy maintained their innocence, their trials stretching into the years that followed, each detail a fresh wound for Pike County. The Rhoden family murders, as they came to be known, left a scar that would never fully heal. 8 lives taken, their deaths a calculated act of erasure, driven by a custody dispute that spiraled into madness.
The spared children, innocent in their cribs, were a haunting reminder of the killer's strange restraint, a choice that only deepened the mystery of their motive. The trailers and houses along Union Hill Road stood as silent witnesses, their walls holding the echoes of a night when love and obsession twisted into something monstrous. As Pike County grappled with the truth, the question lingered: how could a place so small, so familiar, harbor a darkness so vast? The Wagner's arrests brought justice, but no closure, a reminder that even in the quiet of rural Ohio, evil could take root and leave a trail of bodies in its wake. In the quiet of Pike County, Ohio, the stars still hang low over Union Hill Road, but their light carries a weight it never did before. The Rhoden family murders left 8 lives extinguished, their homes transformed into silent graves, haunted by the echoes of a night when trust was shattered. The Wagner's betrayal, born from a bitter custody dispute, revealed a darkness that festers in the shadows of small-town life, where love can twist into obsession and vengeance into slaughter. The spared children, innocent, untouched, stand as a chilling reminder of the killer's restraint, a mystery that lingers like a whisper in the wind. As Pike County mourns, the scars remain, a testament to a truth as cold as the graves. Even in the heart of America's heartland, evil can find a home, and some wounds never heal.